Great. Well, thanks so much to everyone for dialing in and for joining. First of all, sending out some good vibes to everyone. Please be safe and stay healthy. As I'm sure you're feeling, really unprecedented and scary time in the world. So please take care of yourselves and each other. So what I'd love to talk to you today about is what I'm calling the next normal. As we navigate this very unsettling time in the world, some companies, some organizations are forced to firefight immediately in the moment. And that's, of course, natural and happening all around us. For other organizations where they're past that near-term survival, they're able to pick their heads up and think about how to position themselves as we approach this new normal that's going to be created in the world to follow the crisis. Just as we had pre-World War II and post-World War II, pre and post 9/11, I think we'll start to see that there's a pre and post COVID-19 experience that begins to take place in the world. Some of those challenges will be temporary, others will be long-lasting. And while this is challenging at this moment, what I would encourage us to think about and contemplate and explore is that tens, if not hundreds of millions of people are going through a strife right now and are waiting for solutions to problems that they didn't know existed just weeks and months ago. And so they're thinking about what is this invisible threat and how do they combat it? And so it's at that opportunity where we can see this disruption as a chance to move forward and actually take steps to do better, to become better, to be, as we talk about, more empathetic and more thoughtful as brands, as organizations, and as people to one another. So really seeing this as a moment for reinvention, for reinvigoration, and the quote, necessity is the mother of invention. We're truly seeing things today that in organizations, in interactions between people that we did not see or expect and have since been accelerated just in the last couple of weeks. So of course, we talk about reinvention. That is incredibly hard. These times are hard, and thinking about how to reposition, reinvent, and re-energize an organization being thrown into such a crisis mode. And a chart that we think is helpful to think about this is the notion of focusing on today versus focusing on tomorrow. For many organizations, 80% of their time is focused on the today, the here and now. Maybe it's the quarter, maybe it's the year. Frankly, in these days, it might be the day and the week. For our team, we oftentimes are giving teams that opportunity to think about the future. So we actually spend 80% of our time thinking about what is possible, what is the potential, what does the future look like, and how do we navigate ourselves, our organization, as well as the teams that we work with to get to that future state. Just a little bit of context on us. Our company, We Are Bill, is a strategy and design shop, and we take companies from early stage to established and global through brand creation and brand reinvention. Both for new to the world brands as well as large existing companies that are looking to reinvent, reposition, or launch new products and services. So you'll get that feel through how we walk through this talk of kind of our point of view and some of our experience. So first, as mentioned in the overview on this talk, there are 5 key opportunities that we find today for reinvention. And we'll look at that across the lens of building this new age of empathy, and we'll talk about what that means. So first, digital, next, brand and business, and then finally, place and our sense of place and human-to-human opportunities as well. So first, we'll look at digital reinvention. As many of you, I'm sure, are experiencing even through this Zoom call, we are finding digital tools taking on new meaning and new utility. So think about how many of you have experienced, whether it's FaceTimes or Zooms, Skypes, WhatsApps, et cetera, through the last couple of weeks. And those tools just didn't have the resonance, the meaning, the utility maybe that you found before. I can say for one that FaceTime was not always the first mode that I would go to. It was typically just a normal phone call. But as you can see here, my family celebrated a birthday this past weekend. And from around the world, from Hong Kong to San Francisco, Chicago to New York, we all dialed in to be a part of this call. So you're seeing this new meaning being taken on and maybe a new sense of how these tools, just digital and almost abstract, can become more personal and more human. Speaking of that, and maybe you can hear my dog barking in the background, we are all becoming the BBC dad. So if you haven't seen this YouTube video, I'd encourage you to check it out. I'm sure many of you have. We are all in a new human state where we are just trying to navigate and do the best we can. So when we're working from home, the workplace is taking on a new dynamic and maybe just a greater sense of humanity and just peopleness that's involved with the day-to-day. Also, of course, for any student or child or college-age person who's now at home, digital learning tools have accelerated by years. We are seeing more and more tools being developed, implemented, executed. Some existed prior, and those companies are obviously thriving in a day like today. Other teams and school districts are forced really to accelerate how they think about offsite learning and being as impactful, maybe even more so than what on-site learning tools look like. Also, from a social standpoint, social masks are really being taken down. So whereas we would see the veneer of social media, whether it's Instagram or others, other platforms being used as a way to show your best self, now it's a way to show just your normal self and the strife, the challenges, but also some entertainment here. So D-Nice, a DJ that some folks might not have known weeks ago, hit over 100,000 viewers on a recent Instagram Live. Folks from the Obamas to Oprah, many celebrities tuned in as well, and he's running multi-hour sort of concert halls. Also, AOC and Megan Rapinoe doing a chat on the stimulus package just in the last couple of days here. Drew a ton of attention, a ton of following. So think about these platforms that were just for social and maybe fun now being used as a real lifeline to community. Another area that's seeing extreme acceleration, particularly as people and their families get a little more stir crazy at home, are online and at-home workouts. So record downloads, record adoption and engagement with platforms that have been built, whether it's Peloton or Equinox or Mirror or others that have been emerging in the last number of years. I'm now seeing incredible engagement and interaction as people try to stay fit and try to maintain a good mind and body balance through this. Also, I found it interesting that the news and the media worlds are becoming more human. So whether that's your local news covering subjects that really matter, and attention there being paid, network news and national news, as well as even social media. Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, he's broadcasting from his backyard, here in the Hamptons with his kids holding up the signs. This is actually an image of my wife, who's a news anchor for NBC, where we were able to set up in the course of just a day, an at-home live studio setup right in our living room. So you're seeing this touch with humanity being brought in, even Joe Biden and a reporter connecting one-on-one, through video, but they each sort of mentioned that they were in their own respective basements, and what a humanizing moment that was for people on a national stage. So when we think about digital reinvention, there are a couple of implications at the end of each of these sections. I'll just highlight that maybe some of you, your businesses, your organizations, can take into your own practice. So first, rethinking business for a digital first future. What implications and experiences do you as a business need to create to move from a physical contact world to a contactless community and contactless commerce? Also, it's so important that digital experiences are becoming more human. So how do you think about infusing that empathy, that humanity, but also that creativity and that notion of play into what has otherwise been just a static and maybe sort of lesser used, lesser engaged with technology. Next, we'll look at brand reinvention. So I know a lot of people dialing in today are within the creative space or leading brands for different companies around the world. So that's something close to our hearts as well. Of course, wanted to touch on that. What I'll say first is that brands are in a fascinating place, a very challenging place, in fact, where they are sort of hamstrung. They have found that they might not have the resonance in the world that they did just weeks ago. Storylines that are not hitting home and that might feel tone deaf So really how brands behave in the weeks and months to come will really be remembered for years. So I'll highlight maybe just a couple of companies that I think are doing an outstanding job. And part of that comes from them being really focused on what is their purpose, what is their unique, ownable, actionable, compelling point of view and purpose that they have in this world that's existed for them for years. How do they take that, really distill that down and make that meaningful in today's day and age? And I think companies are struggling with this, and there's opportunity for them to think about their purpose. And then critically, this was a comment by Google that I saw last week, prioritizing contribution at every opportunity. And I love that. I think prioritization is so critical when there's so many stories that a brand, company, person can tell. How do they think about the consumer on the other end and what is actually of value to that person, and then contribute in that way that's truly beneficial? So you have a company like Allbirds, co-founder Joey Zwillinger, a very close friend of mine. They've been known for their social impact work, frankly, for several years since they started. But their work this past week or so has been incredible. First giving out, donating shoes, now doing a one-for-one program through their shoe donations, as well as they have such a local presence in communities around the world that really are near and dear to their hearts. And so they're partnering with local businesses like restaurants and others within those communities to really bring a new sense of energy and support to those local businesses. I will say there's a lot today that's very uncertain, and the same goes for the state of brand and the state of marketing. It's very early days, so we won't pretend to know how this will all play out. But there are certain trends that we're starting to see, and maybe we'll step out on a limb in some of what we share. So first, it's early days, but brand loyalty is a bit of a mixed bag. Some are clinging to brands they know as a source of comfort. In other cases where there's stockouts, people are turning to brands they've never purchased from before. So what allows those companies and those brands to stand out, whether they're kind of a private label brand such as Good and Gather at Target, or the toilet paper wars that we're seeing, as insane as they are. People probably don't care what brand of toilet paper they're shopping, even frozen pizzas. Do people care when that's just a source of food and convenience for them and their household? Also, as we think about companies reaching out saying, we're with you, we're in this together, you're seeing a ton of that. That's a lot about solidarity. I would encourage us to really think about how we can be of more value to those consumers, to the world, to the people, the healthcare workers on the front lines. So thinking about value and what really resonates, not just standing by. Also, from a standpoint of brand reinvention, there are certain industries that by nature in crisis mode accelerate. And so you see that in comfort foods, might be baking cookies. People are probably living at home in their sweats, and the world doesn't see that. So things like gravity blankets, sweats, kind of at-home comfort attire, even nostalgia typically has a real spike as people flood to safety, security, and so movies. I just was speaking to a friend this week who was watching Big and other movies from the 80s and 90s, just a sense of comfort in unstable times. So as we think about brand reinvention, and we'll touch on this a bit more in the coming sections, really think about resonating with your audience and resetting that authentic vision and purpose, that contribution at every opportunity, and what does that mean for your organization and for the need at hand as this crisis plays out in months to come. Being really consumer-centric, so not just what's right for a business and maybe how an internal team thinks, but getting beyond those walls to think about who the consumer is and how to really message in a way that will resonate with them. And then finally, as we move from firefighting to thinking about the future, it's so critical to move from that defensive posture to offense and really taking ownership of how to create a new future for your people, your organization, and ultimately for your consumers. Next, we'll look at business reinvention. So that goes a bit hand in hand, we believe, with brand, but a couple of things that are happening on a business level that we think are important to highlight. First, this is so critical. This happened during 9/11. It's happened in other crises in the past. Institutions that can reinvent themselves to really optimize insight and foresight will disproportionately succeed. So a business, a high-end restaurant actually in the Seattle area, a James Beard award-winning restaurant, pivoted within just a couple of days. The brand is called Canlis, to shift from being a high-end restaurant to actually delivering takeout, drive-through, and delivery services across a couple of different elements of their business. And the primary purpose was quite thoughtful about their team and their people. They just need to keep their employees, a part of the business and find some livelihood for them. But also they thought high-end restaurants are just not needed in this day and age. How do we actually serve our Seattle community within a 7 to 10 mile radius with what they do need? And so that was an amazing pivot that this team was able to make. Fascinatingly, you're seeing companies that would typically tout how large they've grown, how many employees they have globally, how many offices they have around the world. You've seen a shift in those businesses to now they're probably talking less. The companies that have fewer employees and maybe have a different distributed model, they are being highlighted. I'm really speaking up for not how many employees they do have, but how few they have in order to now succeed and maybe get by. So that's an interesting shift. Not putting good or bad out there for this, but just a dynamic that we've seen play out. Also, as difficult as it is to think about moving forward, because we are dealing with such a state of uncertainty, whether that's in the markets or our day-to-day lives or businesses, there will be a time when this crisis is past, and we are moving forward, and we're moving forward together. What does that new state of the world look like? And for businesses, that could be in the world of sports, where how do they rethink their model, rethink their approach in a world that might not be full of people wanting to inhabit the same space in close proximity to one another in the months to follow. Next, within the restaurant industry, especially being in New York, the springtime is an incredible season for people coming out of their offices and really celebrating. What does that look like for the restaurant industry? Will we see a resurgence there? In the makeup world, will we see a resurgence for brands that are maybe struggling a bit in the immediate term? So really think about meeting people where they are, gaining insight and foresight, and then acting upon those and rethinking scale and efficiencies and being prepared to lead. Just two more, and then we'll open up for some Q&A in the last couple of minutes. So place is something that we're all finding to be an interesting new context that we're living in. So we're all living and working from home, potentially with our families surrounding us. It's just a new dynamic. So in this moment, with all this change, how do we think about rediscovering what home is and where that is? And what is that sense of home and that sense of place that we all have? You can see here in Sao Paulo, people out on their balconies trying to create a sense of community and speaking to one another. There's another place reinvention that we're seeing is really around the earth and the planet and our care for it. So whether it's the maps of pollution around China or the Venice canals, Mother Earth is really telling us to chill out. Will we listen in this moment? And I'd encourage us all to think about that. Going out on a limb a bit, maybe we see that there's a migration from cities. Maybe people don't want to be in cities like they've always wanted to be in the last decades. Maybe cities are getting greener. Maybe there's this convergence that we're seeing in that context. Another place for invention, maybe there's an emergence of a new craft or cottage industry where it's not about big and scale and commerce, but rather about a localization and a sense of humanity brought to a more communal or a more craft cottage level. So this is artwork by Beth Ann Laura Wood that is pretty brilliant in the most recent Dwell magazine. So implications here, working from home is really making us rethink what is home. In turn, that can inspire reconnection to nature, a return to simpler ways, and then also maybe a negative here, but something to watch out for and maybe overcome is this hypersensitivity to touch screens, touch one another, out in public places, and how a sense of place might be redefined with the contactless world that we're now experiencing. Finally, human reinvention. So we break down from business to category to place, now to the human level. It has been an incredible social experiment. I know that it's a challenging time, but some of what we're seeing, whether it's a fitness trainer in Beijing who's broadcasting to their followers using milk cartons instead of weights. Ironically, a tribalization that we've seen in past years and almost an inward turning of people driven by politics, social media, and other factors. Now we're seeing this reversal. And you can see here almost this virtual dance parties that are being created around the world, people really feeling a sense of community and coming together despite the separation. A close friend of ours and of our company's, Jonathan Olinger, mentioned a quote just recently over the weekend. As we look forward, it's so important to keep this in mind. Never let the understandable fear of disease become the unnecessary fear of one another. So in this new world that we're living in, how do we maintain compassion, empathy, and a sense of connection to one another, despite challenges and fears that this has naturally created? And then finally, I'd really want to highlight, there's a lot of talk in the recent years around mental health, and that voice is so needed in the world. A concern that we have is around this next war that we will need to wage around mental health. Anxiety, fear, that inward turning that individuals might be facing at any age, frankly. And so really as organizations, as people, as friends, from a health capacity and from a medical standpoint, really being aware of this and helping to overcome those challenges. So finally, our human reinvention implications, as organizations, be more vulnerable, not less. Be open, be human, and really embrace this challenge that we're all facing. Also, move closer to the end user. We always encourage our companies that we work with to really focus on who is that end user, how do you deliver value and deliver tangible but also emotional connection to them. And this might mean dialing up that emotional proximity and that empathy. So finally, in closing, our company drew inspiration from Bill Withers. This was years ago when we launched. Lean on Me was the inspiring song to us as a lean new organization. But we're particularly reminded of this in this day and age, as we really need to lean on each other, lean into our blind spots and our bright spots. And finally, I'd encourage you all to lean into that next normal, embrace change, embrace that opportunity to disrupt and to reinvent as people, as organizations, and as a community overall. So with that, Catherine, if you want to open up for questions, if we have a few minutes remaining.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great presentation. Thank you, Scott. And I love that ending. Lean into your blind spots. That's great. So we have one here from Tim Sutton. Hi, Tim, another one of our speakers. He says, what do you think is the best way to do insight work right now? Is traditional primary research too intrusive, or can we get a real read on consumers with everything they're dealing with?
Yeah, hey, Tim. Thanks for the question. Great to hear from you. So we think that consumer research and insights is critical for any business and any brand. And depending on the opportunity, we find that a couple of different ways of going about collecting that consumer research can be helpful. One of the things that we found just through the last couple of weeks is that people are really open to sharing. They are looking for that sense of connection. They appreciate that this is a challenging time. And so just being with them on a call or on a Skype or having a conversation with them about what they're experiencing and what they're feeling, we've been impressed by how open consumers and humans, people are out in the world to really share their story. So we think one-on-one ethnographic, kind of person-to-person contact, through video, through phone, can be really important and really impactful. When it gets to focus groups and other modes, those are probably more challenging in the moment. So we'll have to see how that plays out as we think about getting groups together for community interaction and kind of distilling insights and learnings from that.
Perfect. I think we have time for one more. There's one here from Tobias. The brand trends recently is experience, experience, experience. Where will this go?
It's a great question. I mean, I think experience is still going to be critical. I think that we will probably see a shift in what that experience means. So whereas you have a physical experience, a touch, a feel, there was that huge shift from thinking that e-commerce was the future and that retail was dead. Of course, that's proved wildly inaccurate. Physical retail has been performing incredibly well, especially for many DTC companies that had learnings from their digital interactions and data that they were able to then build that into the physical experience. As I mentioned, things like that hypersensitivity to touch and that hypersensitivity to gatherings of larger than several people, that is something to be aware of and to be thoughtful of. And so I think we might see in the immediate term some pullback on what a physical experience can be. I think that might be challenging for organizations that are tied to physical experience. But that could be an opportunity, we would say, to think about what is a digital experience to compensate or overcome, and maybe even improve on what has otherwise been a strictly physical experience out in the world.
Martin says, how open is retail for reinvention from your point of view? Place reinvention specifically.
Yeah, I think it really depends. Again, there's longstanding, retail organizations that I imagine are going to see some real significant challenge through this, whether just because of scale. It's tough to kind of navigate and head in a new direction, kind of that tanker ship versus a speedboat concept. So I think reinvention will be challenging for some organizations. And reinvention also doesn't need to be complete and entire and a wholesale, kind of shift in strategy. There could be another reinvention that is more achievable, that is more doable and can get data points. Talking about sort of doesn't need to be innovation for innovation's sake, but how to put implementations and new exercises into place to be able to test small, learn, iterate, and then continue to build. So, well, depending on the organization, reinvention might be a necessity for survival. For others, it might be more kind of stage gate and a little bit of a trial and error to see what works, what doesn't, and how to really build for a new future.
Great. And Mark is asking, what technologies do you think are best positioned to help consumers overcome that fear of touch and closeness?
Man, I would say a technologist might be better suited to answer that than I would. I think it's something that we'll have to see play out. There are in-person, in kind of physical spaces. There are those touchscreens that we see, even typing in a keypad, checking out from a grocery store a week or two ago. It's just something I was hypersensitive around. So I think increasingly we'll see that will maybe come down over time. But yeah, that will be a challenge to sort of think about. Maybe something worth exploring with a technology or a digital kind of expert.
All right, and I think that's a great place to close. Thank you so much, Scott. Wonderful presentation. A really nice turnout, too, in the audience.
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it. If you want to find me on social, feel free. Happy to answer any more questions that come up. But thanks again for joining, and stay well.